Ethan Moore fixed his gaze on the quantum glass partition of his compact dwelling, his eyes drawn to the three celestial bodies of Neos. The celestial orbs cast elongated, ever-shifting shadows over the alien metropolis. The smallest, Cerulean, emitted an electrifying sapphire radiance that transformed the crystalline towers into what resembled petrified lightning bolts. It had been 6 cycles since his arrival on this world, yet he still hadn't become fully accustomed to the vista. His datapad vibrated, breaking through his melancholy contemplation. He anticipated a communication from Earth, something to break the monotony of debugging unfamiliar alien software protocols. Instead, the official emblem of the Neosian Cultural Integration Council glowed on his screen. "What is it this time?" he muttered, activating the notice. It was a declaration of mandatory cultural companion assignment, designated for Ethan Moore, Terrestrial ID 2187. As specified in Section 7.3 of the Immigration Act, he had been assigned an integration associate to ease his adaptation to Neosian society. He was to report to the Cultural Affairs Directorate, Tower 9, Level 42, at 0900 hours, local time. Ethan ran his fingers through his dark locks. A mandatory companion. They were giving him a babysitter. He felt he'd been doing just fine on his own. Sure, he might have inadvertently offended that merchant by breathing through his mouth instead of his nostrils, and there was also the produce handling incident at the marketplace, but still. The next morning, Ethan traversed the gravity tubes to Tower 9, skillfully avoiding the currents of Neosians, who navigated the transport system with practiced ease. Their bioluminescent skin tones ranged from subtle coral to deep violet, making his pallid human complexion appear even more conspicuous. The Directorate occupied an entire level, its walls transitioning between transparency and opaqueness in elaborate sequences. A holographic perceptionist manifested as he approached the reception desk. "Welcome to the Cultural Affairs Directorate. Please state your designation," it intoned. "Ethan Moore, Terrestrial ID 2187. "I'm here regarding a cultural companion assignment," he responded. "Acknowledged. Proceed to Chamber 17. Your companion awaits." Chamber 17 turned out to be a small enclosure with walls that portrayed a terrestrial sky, complete with white clouds and a simulated sun. Ethan wondered if this was intended to make him feel at ease. It didn't. The entrance slid open, and Ethan's breath hitched. A young Neosian woman stood near the faux window. Her skin shimmered, reflecting the hues of a setting sun. Unlike the common violet and blue tones he had observed, hers possessed an almost roseate quality, emanating an inner luminescence. However, it was her ears that captivated his attention, delicate, slightly pointed structures that emitted a soft phosphorescence, shifting from pink to gold as she turned toward him. "Oh," she exclaimed, her ears flaring a bright gold for an instant, before diminishing to a tentative pink. "You must be Ethan Moore." "I am Clara," she offered, a slight bow accompanying her words. She then seemed to catch herself and extended her hand, only to quickly retract it. "Sorry, I am still learning Earth customs." Ethan found himself smiling. "Just Ethan is fine, and either salutation works for me." "Right." "Yes, of course," Clara's ears flickered rapidly between shades. "I have been designated as your cultural assimilation companion to assist with your acculturation." She cringed at her own phrasing. "I am not certain that I require assistance," Ethan began. "The marketplace event was documented in your record," Clara interjected, immediately covering her mouth with her hand. "I apologize, that was unprofessional of me." Ethan's cheeks flushed. "That was a misunderstanding. How was I supposed to know you needed to sing to the fruit before purchasing it?" A soft laugh escaped Clara. Musical and illuminated, she said before composing herself. Her ears shifted to a deeper gold. "Well, that is why I am here, to help prevent such misinterpretations." She moved toward a small table where various official documents were displayed. "We should commence with the traditional first encounter ritual." "Ritual?" Ethan's experience with Neosian rituals had been less than stellar. "Yes, it is of great importance," Clara replied. Her ears pulsed with a new hue, somewhere between violet and crimson. In our tradition, new companions must partake in the consummation of unity. Ethan's eyes widened. The what now? He questioned, taken aback. The consummation of unity. We must. She seemed to be searching for the appropriate words, her ears intensifying in brilliance. We must unite our essences. Ethan gasped for breath. Excuse me, he blurted out. It's a profoundly meaningful tradition, Clara continued earnestly, seemingly unaware of his dismay. The ultimate manifestation of trust between companions. I have always found it quite romantic. I mean, significant, culturally significant. When you say consume, Ethan took a step backward, you don't mean, literally, with cutlery and all. Clara's ears cycled through an array of colors in quick succession. Cutlery? Oh, no. Her eyes widened with horror. It is a spiritual consumption, a merging of essences via shared breath and energy. Not eating. They stared at one another for a lengthy moment before Ethan started laughing. After a beat, Clara joined him, her ears illuminating with a radiant yellow. I am so sorry, she gasped, giggling. The translation must have been dreadful. No wonder you look terrified. I was picturing having to explain to Earth why their programmer was eaten by his integration counselor. Ethan admitted, wiping tears from his eyes. Is that what humans think of us? That we devour people? Clara looked both horrified and amused. Well, one must admit, consummation ritual is pretty ambiguous. I suppose it is. Clara's ears settled into a warm, golden glow. Perhaps we should begin with something simpler, like how to properly greet a fruit vendor. Probably safer. Ethan agreed. Then, he added with a grin, though, I have to admit, the consummation ritual would have made a far more interesting story to relay back home. Clara's ears flashed that violet-crimson color once more, and she quickly immersed herself in the paperwork. Yes, well, let us focus on the basics first. She glanced up at him through her lashes, though there are many fascinating rituals you will learn about eventually. Ethan felt his pulse quicken at her tone. Maybe having an integration companion wouldn't be so bad after all. So, Ethan settled into one of the adaptive chairs that conformed to his human physique. What other terrifying rituals should I be aware of? Clara's ears flickered playfully. Well, there's the dance of atmospheric alignment. Please inform me that does not involve actual atmospheric alignment. I am terrible at antigrave maneuvers. No, but it does require exact coordination with your partner, she demonstrated with a fluid movement of her hands that left glittering trails in the air. The energy flow must be perfectly synchronized. Ethan watched the sparkles fade. Your species can create light shows at will? Only when we are. Clara's ears shifted to that alluring violet crimson again, emotionally engaged. And what emotions cause that particular color? Ethan inquired, gesturing toward her ears. Clara quickly turned away, shuffling papers. We should focus on your cultural integration schedule. You have quite a few essential protocols to master. Now, I am even more curious. Curiosity is good, very good, for learning cultural things. Clara's words tumbled out as she pulled up a holographic schedule. We will meet 3 times a week, commencing with basic social interactions, then proceeding to business protocols, and lastly, to more advanced cultural exchanges. Advanced like the consummation ritual? You are not going to let that go, are you? But she was smiling, her ears casting a warm golden luminescence onto the wall. Never. It's not every day a captivating alien offers to consume my essence. The holographic schedule scattered into particles as Clara lost her focus. That is. We should probably address appropriate complement protocols. Was that inappropriate? Ethan inquired, genuinely concerned, fearing he had crossed a boundary. No. I mean, yes. Clara took a deep breath. Her ears were practically strobing now. Direct, personal compliments are usually reserved for the 3rd phase of acquaintanceship, after the ritual of mutual understanding, and before the ceremony of intentional proximity. Ethan leaned forward. And what phase are we in now? Phase 1, very firmly, Phase 1. Clara stated, though her ears suggested otherwise. Which signifies we should adhere to formal cultural instruction. Of course, Ethan agreed solemnly. So, formally speaking, when can I begin learning about what makes your ears change color? Clara's lips twitched. Phase 4. There is a Phase 4? How many phases are there? 7. She glanced at him sideways. Though, some couples create their own phases. The air between them seemed to crackle with unspoken possibilities. Ethan cleared his throat. And how long does each phase typically last? Traditionally, several months each. Clara shuffled closer, under the pretense of showing him something on her data pad. Her scent reminded him of star blossoms and ozone. But I have heard of some progressive couples who accelerate the process. How progressive of them, Ethan murmured, very aware of how close she was. Indeed. Clara's ears were now emitting a gentle, pulsing glow, making the room feel more intimate. Though, of course, as your official cultural companion, I should advocate for the traditional timeline. Of course, it would be highly irregular to skip phases completely, inappropriate, especially given my position, absolutely scandalous. They were both grinning now, the facade of formality wearing thin. Clara opened her mouth to say something else, but a sharp chime interrupted them. She jumped back, her ears instantly shifting to a professional blue. That is the end of our scheduled session, she said, smoothing her iridescent attire. We will begin your proper cultural training tomorrow, 0900 hours, at the Central Gardens. The Gardens? Ethan raised an eyebrow. Not here? The Gardens are. Clara's ears betrayed her again with a flash of gold, traditional for first lessons. Traditional, like the consummation ritual? You really must stop bringing that up, she laughed, heading for the door. It is very distracting. Is that why your ears keep changing color? Clara paused at the threshold, looking back at him with a mix of exasperation and amusement. Phase 4, Mr. Moore, Phase 4. As the door whispered shut behind her, Ethan couldn't help but grin. Cultural integration was turning out to be far more interesting than he'd expected. He made a mental note to look up how one might, theoretically, accelerate through these phases while maintaining proper protocol. After all, he was here to learn about the culture, and what could be more cultural than finding creative ways to bend traditional rules? The Central Gardens of Neos, by Earth's definition of a garden, were crystalline trees that pulsated with bioluminescent sap, their branches intertwining to create natural archways that seemed to sing in harmonic frequencies. Ethan arrived early, observing floating orbs of water nourishing exotic plants that danced in invisible currents. Beautiful, isn't it? Clara's voice came from behind him. Ethan turned and, momentarily, lost his ability to speak. She had traded her formal directorate attire for what must have been casual Neosian clothing, a flowing ensemble that shifted hues like oil on water, perfectly complementing her sunset skin. Her ears glowed with a soft, welcoming gold. Very, he managed, not looking at the gardens at all. Clara's ears flickered to that fascinating violet crimson. The Gardens, Mr. Moore. We are here to discuss the gardens. Of course, the gardens, very garden-like, she laughed, the sound making the crystal trees resonate. Your observational skills are remarkable. I am distracted by attempting to calculate how many phases we could skip if we really applied ourselves. Cultural integration is not a race, she chided, but her eyes sparkled. Now, shall we begin with the proper way to greet a sacred thorn bloom? Does it involve singing? Actually, she led him to a floating platform surrounded by iridescent flowers. It involves dancing. Ethan stopped short. You are joking. Not at all. Clara demonstrated a series of graceful movements. The flowers around her swayed in response, releasing tiny spots of light that swirled around her like fireflies. The thorn blooms are empathically sensitive. They respond to emotional energy expressed through movement. I should warn you, Earth engineers aren't known for their dancing abilities. Clara extended her hand. Fortunately, you have an excellent teacher. Ethan took her hand, trying to ignore the pleasant tingling sensation where their skin met. "If I step on your feet, remember, this was your idea. Just follow my lead," she said softly, pulling him onto the platform. "Feel the resonance of the garden. Let it guide you." She placed his other hand on her waist, and Ethan suddenly found it very hard to concentrate on the garden's resonance. The fabric of her dress felt alive beneath his palm, and her skin seemed to glow brighter at the contact. "The basic step is simple," Clara explained, her voice slightly breathless. "Like this." She began to move, and Ethan followed, trying not to focus on how perfectly she fit against him. The thorn blooms around them began to pulse with light, responding to their movements. "You are thinking too much," Clara murmured. "Just feel." "I am feeling quite a lot right now," Ethan admitted. Her ears flashed that remarkable violet crimson again. "The dance, Mr. Moore. Focus on the dance. You know, you could call me Ethan. That would be highly irregular for Phase 1. We are already dancing in a magical garden. How much more irregular can it get?" Clara's eyes met his, full of mischief. "Would you like to find out?" Before Ethan could respond, she spun them faster, adding complexity to the steps. The thorn blooms erupted in a shower of luminescent spores that swirled around them like stardust. Ethan found himself laughing, caught up in the pure joy of the moment. They moved together as if they'd done this 100 times, the garden responding to their shared energy. Clara's ears were glowing brighter than he'd ever seen, casting patterns across their faces as they spun. "Still think you can't dance?" she asked, slightly out of breath. "I think I just needed the right partner." Their eyes locked, and their movement slowly came to a stop. They stood there, still wrapped in each other's arms, surrounded by swirling lights. Ethan was acutely aware of how close they were, how her hands felt in his, how her ears were pulsing with that intense violet-crimson glow. "Clara," he said softly, "what does that color really mean?" She bit her lip, seemingly waging an internal battle. "Finally," she whispered, "Phase 4. We could make it Phase 2. Her laugh was shaky. "You are terrible for my professional reputation. I prefer to think I am excellent for your cultural exchange experience." "Is that what we are calling this?" Her eyes danced with amusement. "What would you call it, instead?" Instead of answering, Clara slowly pulled away, though her hands lingered in his. "I would call it a very successful first dance lesson." "Just the first." "There are more, many more," she promised, her ears flickering playfully, each more complex than the last. "And do they all involve being this close, Mr. Moore?" she said, trying to sound stern, but failing completely. "Are you attempting to accelerate the phases again?" "Just conducting thorough cultural research." Clara shook her head, but her ears gave her away. "You are going to be trouble, aren't you?" "I prefer to think of it as being culturally innovative." "Is that what they call flirting on Earth?" Ethan grinned. "Would it be inappropriate to say yes?" "Completely." But she was smiling, too. "We should probably move on to safer topics, like proper greeting protocols." "Do those involve dancing, too?" "Phase 3, she said primly, but her eyes sparkled with promise. "I am starting to think these phases were designed to be frustrating. They were designed to build anticipation." Clara's voice took on a quality that made Ethan's pulse quicken. "Something tells me you will excel at that part." Over the subsequent weeks, Ethan's cultural integration lessons with Clara became the highlight of his days on Neos. Today, they sat in a floating cafe overlooking the crystalline spires of the city, supposedly discussing proper business etiquette. "So," Ethan stirred his color-changing beverage, "you are telling me that in formal meetings, I have to maintain eye contact for precisely 7 seconds before looking away?" 7.3 seconds, Clara corrected, her ears glowing a warm amber. "Any longer is considered intimate, any shorter is dismissive." "And how long have you been maintaining eye contact with me right now?" Clara quickly looked down at her data pad, her ears flashing that telltale violet crimson. "That is not relevant to the lesson." "I counted 12 seconds, Mr. Moore." "Back to Mr. Moore after I caught you breaking protocol." Her lips twitched. I was merely demonstrating what not to do. Of course, very professional of you. A sharp chirp from Clara's communicator interrupted their banter. Her ears instantly shifted to a pale blue as she read the message. Everything okay? Ethan asked, noting her sudden tension. Fine, she said. Just a reminder from the directorate. She tried to smile, but her ears betrayed her anxiety. Perhaps we should focus on tomorrow's civic ceremony preparations. The one where I have to recite the ancient greeting to the council? Yes, and it's crucial that you get it exactly right. Her tone turned serious. The pronunciation must be perfect, or it could be seen as deeply disrespectful. Ethan reached across the table, briefly touching her hand. Hey, I have been practicing. It will be fine. Clara didn't pull away from his touch, but her ears pulsed with worry. The directorate has been monitoring our progress closely. Is that what that message was about? She hesitated. They feel our sessions have become too informal, because of the dancing lessons, because of everything. Clara finally withdrew her hand. There are strict protocols about cultural companion relationships, protocols I have been bending. Bending sounds better than breaking, Ethan offered with a grin, trying to lighten the mood. This is not funny, Ethan. The use of his first name made his heart skip. If the directorate decides I am not maintaining proper professional distance, they will. What? Assign me a different companion. The thought made something cold settle in his stomach. Clara's ears had dimmed to an almost grey color. They could do worse than that. My family has served in the cultural directorate for generations. If I disgrace the position, Ethan leaned forward. Look at me. When she did, he held her gaze deliberately, 7.3 seconds right. Despite herself, Clara smiled. You are impossible. I prefer culturally innovative. He glanced at his own datapad. Now, about this ceremony tomorrow, walk me through it one more time. They spent the next hour reviewing the complex protocols, but Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was brewing, the way Clara kept checking her communicator, how her ears would flicker anxiously whenever certain officials were mentioned. The next evening arrived with all the subtlety of a quantum storm. The civic hall was packed with Neosian dignitaries, their bioluminescent formal wear creating waves of living light throughout the chamber. Ethan adjusted his earth suit, feeling distinctly underdressed. Remember, Clara whispered beside him, her own formal attire making her look like a living sunset. Start with the third tone, then rise to the fifth for the second phrase, and whatever you do, don't make eye contact with the High Counselor until after the third verse. Relax, Ethan murmured back, I have got this. The ceremony began with a traditional light song, the assembled Neosians creating intricate patterns of bioluminescence that danced through the air. Then came the moment Ethan had been practicing for. He stepped forward, ready to recite the ancient greeting. That's when he saw them, 3 directorate officials watching intently from a private box, their attention focused not on him, but on Clara. One made a note on a datapad, and Clara's ears flickered with distress. Ethan made a split-second decision. Instead of the formal, distant greeting he had practiced, he launched into a more passionate version, one he had found in his research that was traditionally used for declaring intentions of cultural unity. The chamber went silent. Clara's ears blazed with shock. The directorate officials stood up. Ethan continued, putting every ounce of feeling into the ancient words, maintaining direct eye contact with the High Counselor. Protocol be damned. He was going to show them exactly how seriously he took this cultural exchange. He finished with a flourish, adding the traditional light blessing gesture Clara had taught him. For a moment, no one moved. Then, chaos erupted. The High Counselor's skin shifted to a deep, stormy violet, a color Ethan had never seen on a Neosian before. The directorate officials were practically sprinting down from their box, and the assembled crowd had erupted into a cascade of flickering lights and urgent whispers. Ethan, Clara's voice was barely a whisper, her ears pulsing with panic, do you have any idea what you just did? Showed them how committed I am to cultural integration. You just performed the ritual of eternal bonding in front of the entire civic council. Ethan's stomach dropped. The what? That version of the greeting, it's an ancient declaration of, she swallowed hard, of marriage intentions. Before Ethan could process this, the directorate officials reached them. The leader, a tall Neosian with stern features, addressed Clara in their native tongue. Her ears went completely dark, something Ethan had never seen before. English, please. Ethan stepped forward, positioning himself slightly in front of Clara. If you are going to reprimand someone, reprimand me. Oh, we intend to. The official's voice was cold. Cultural companion Clara, you are relieved of your duties effective immediately. Your family will be notified of your indiscretion. This isn't her fault, Ethan protested. I chose that version of the greeting on my own. Did you? The official's gaze cut to Clara. And how exactly did you learn of this extremely private cultural rite, one that is certainly not included in standard integration materials? Ethan opened his mouth to respond, but Clara touched his arm gently. Don't make it worse, she murmured. The High Counselor approached, the crowd parting before him. His violet complexion had settled into something more contemplative. Tell me, Earthborn, his voice resonated through the chamber, did you understand the significance of the words you spoke? Ethan straightened. I understood they were meant to declare deep commitment to cultural unity. And do you feel such commitment? Ethan glanced at Clara, whose ears were now emitting a faint, hopeful glow. Yes. More than I can express in any language. The High Counselor was silent for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, his skin shifted to a warm gold. Perhaps, he addressed the directorate officials, we have been too rigid in our protocols. But, High Counselor, the lead official sputtered. The traditions were made in a time before the stars brought us new friends. The High Counselor's gaze swept the chamber. Perhaps it is time for some traditions to evolve. Hope flickered through the crowd like a wave of light. Clara's ears began to glow brighter. However, the High Counselor turned back to Ethan. Such evolution must be handled with proper respect. You will need to prove your understanding of our ways before any declarations can be formally recognized. I am willing to learn, Ethan said firmly, whatever it takes, even if it means starting over. The High Counselor asked, from Phase 1. Ethan heard Clara's small intake of breath beside him. He smiled, as long as I have the right teacher. The directorate officials looked like they wanted to object, but the High Counselor raised a hand. Cultural companion Clara, you will continue your duties, but under direct supervision. And you, he addressed Ethan, will attend formal cultural education sessions in addition to your regular lessons. Thank you, High Counselor. Clara bowed deeply as the crowd began to disperse and the officials retreated. Ethan turned to Clara. I am sorry if I made things difficult for you. Her ears were cycling through colors so quickly he could barely track them. Did you really research ancient bonding rituals? I might have done some extra reading, you know, for cultural purposes. And you chose that particular greeting, knowing it would cause a scandal. I chose it because I wanted them to see that this is not just a job to you, or just lessons to me. Ethan stepped closer, although I didn't know I was actually proposing marriage. Clara's ears settled into that beautiful violet crimson. Well, technically you would need to complete the other 6 parts of the ritual before it would be considered a proper proposal. Only 6? Ethan grinned. Do they all have to be performed in front of the entire government? Stop, she laughed, but didn't move away when he took her hand. We are supposed to be starting over at Phase 1, remember? About that, Ethan glanced around before pulling her into a quiet alcove. Does Phase 1 prohibit this? Before she could ask, what this? This was, he kissed her. For a moment, Clara froze, then melted into him, her ears blazing so bright they lit up the entire alcove. When they finally parted, she looked dazed. That is definitely not Phase 1 protocol. What phase is kissing? There isn't one, she admitted. We don't usually. So, I finally found a cultural practice humans do better? Clara's eyes sparkled. Further research may be required before making that determination. I am always happy to contribute to cultural understanding. Nick, she pressed a hand to his chest, suddenly serious. What you did tonight, no one has ever accidentally proposed to someone in front of the planetary government, stood up for me like that. Her ears pulsed softly, risked everything, just to protect me. Ethan caught her hand, pressing it closer to his heart. Get used to it. Apparently, I am very serious about cultural integration. So, Ethan said the next morning, as they sat in a private study room at the directorate, supposedly reviewing proper cultural protocols, what other marriage rituals did I accidentally sign up for? Clara's ears flickered between gold and that enticing violet crimson. We should be focusing on your formal education requirements. This is educational. I need to know what other diplomatic incidents I might cause. Clara's ears betrayed her fluster. There is the dance of eternal stars, the sharing of souls, the threading of light. Is that the one where your ears do that beautiful violet crimson thing they're doing right now? My ears are not. She caught her reflection in the window and stopped mid-sentence. You are distracting me on purpose. Guilty, Ethan grinned. But you still haven't told me what that color means. It means you should pay attention to your lessons before the directorate assigns you a different companion. They wouldn't dare. I'd just proposed to the new one, too. Clara tried to look stern but failed completely. You are taking this entirely too lightly. On the contrary, Ethan moved his chair closer. I take you very seriously. Her ears pulsed brightly. Ethan, 7.3 seconds of eye contact, he reminded her softly. That is the rule, right? They held each other's gaze, both knowing they were well past the proper time limit. Clara broke first, looking down at her datapad with a shaky laugh. The directorate has cameras in here, you know. Let them watch. I am just being culturally thorough. Is that what you are calling this? What would you call it? Clara met his eyes again, her expression softening. Dangerous. Worth it, though. Instead of answering, she pulled up another holographic display. We should review the proper hand positions for tomorrow's apology ceremony. Ah, yes, my formal apology to the council for the proposal incident. Ethan smirked. Should I accidentally include another proposal in this one, too? Don't you dare, but her ears were glowing with amusement. This is serious. You need to show proper contrition. I am not sorry, though, Ethan, I am not. And I don't think you are, either. Clara's ears dimmed slightly. What happened? What is happening? It is not simple. Because of your family, the directorate, because of everything, she sighed. Our cultures are so different. What you see as romantic gestures could be serious taboos. What I feel could be completely misaligned with what you mean. Then teach me. Ethan took her hand, noting how her ears immediately brightened. That is what you are here for, right? Cultural understanding. This goes far beyond my official duties. Good thing I am an overachiever. He traced a pattern on her palm, watching her ears flicker rapidly. What does this mean in your culture? Clara's breath caught. That is the symbol for devotion. Really? No, she admitted with a small laugh. I just didn't want you to stop. Ethan grinned. Now, who is being culturally inappropriate? Still you. But she hadn't pulled her hand away. We really should focus on the ceremony. One more question first, if it's about my ears again. No, this is serious. Ethan leaned forward. These phases you keep mentioning, are they actually mandatory, or more like guidelines? Clara's ears glowed brighter than he had ever seen. Why do you ask? Because I am starting to think some rules are meant to be redefined. He brushed a thumb across her knuckles, especially when they stand in the way of something real. The way she looked at him, then, with her ears pulsing that beautiful violet crimson, made every cultural mishap worth it. The directorate would not approve, she whispered. The directorate doesn't get to decide how I feel about you.